In the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier, where survival meant choosing between your own life and someone else's, one man made a decision that would change everything. Jack Sullivan was just a poor cowboy, barely scraping by with odd jobs and whatever the harsh land would give him. He had nothing, no family, no fortune, no future to speak of. But when he stumbled upon a dying child in the desert, abandoned and alone, something inside him refused to walk away. With his last piece of bread and his only canteen of water, Jack chose compassion over self-preservation. He had no idea that this single act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events beyond imagination. Because the next morning, as the sun rose over the dusty plains, Jack would wake to find himself surrounded by 150 of the most fearsome warriors the West had ever known. This is the story of how one moment of humanity bridged two worlds, and how the poorest man in the territory became the richest in ways no gold could measure. As the child drank, Jack examined him more carefully. The bruises and cuts suggested he'd either fallen from a great height or been in some kind of accident. His clothing was torn in places, and he wore a small leather pouch around his neck decorated with beads and symbols Jack didn't recognize. Most concerning was the fever. The boy's forehead was burning hot, suggesting infection had set in. Jack looked around the desolate landscape. He was at least a day and a half from Red Creek, and 2 days from the last town he'd passed through. There were no farms or ranches in this area, just endless desert and rock. Taking the boy with him would slow his journey significantly, and he barely had enough supplies for himself. If he shared his food and water with the child, they might both die before reaching civilization. For a long moment, Jack sat there in the dust, weighing his options. The practical choice was clear: leave the boy and ride on. He couldn't save everyone, and this child wasn't his responsibility. Besides, the Apache had their own ways of dealing with the lost and injured. Maybe someone from his tribe would come looking for him. Jack tried to convince himself of this as he looked down at the small, fevered face. But he knew it was a lie. No one was coming. If he left this child here, the boy would die, if not from dehydration, then from the sun or the cold desert night, or any of the predators that roamed these lands. Jack thought of his own father, of the values the old man had tried to instill in him despite their poverty. Being poor ain't the same as being poor in spirit, his father used to say. You can be broke and still be rich in what matters. Jack made his decision. He carefully gathered the boy into his arms. God, the child weighed almost nothing and lifted him onto his horse. He fashioned a makeshift carrier using his blanket, securing the boy in front of the saddle where he could monitor him during the ride. Then he gave the child another small drink from his canteen and broke off a piece of his bread, softening it with water until it was mushy enough for the boy to swallow. The sun was past its peak now, beginning its descent toward evening. Jack remounted behind the boy, holding him steady with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. He turned the Mare away from Red Creek and back toward the direction he'd come from, toward a small creek he'd passed yesterday where they could camp and he could tend to the child's wounds properly. As they rode, the boy occasionally stirred, murmuring words in a language Jack didn't understand. The fever was making him delirious, and twice the child cried out as if in pain or fear. Each time, Jack spoke softly to him, his voice low and reassuring, even though he knew the boy probably couldn't understand English any better than he could understand Apache. Night was falling when they reached the creek. Jack set up a small camp, building a fire and laying out his blanket near the warmth. He cleaned the boy's wounds as best he could with water and strips torn from his extra shirt, wincing at the deep gash on the child's forehead. The boy needed proper medicine, needed a doctor, but Jack had neither. All he could offer was water, the rest of his bread made into a thin gruel, and the warmth of the fire. That night, Jack barely slept. He kept the fire burning and monitored the boy's fever, occasionally giving him small sips of water. At some point in the dark hours before dawn, the child's eyes finally opened. They were dark and confused, filled with fear as they focused on Jack's face. The boy tried to pull away, and Jack held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, son. You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." Jack spoke slowly, his voice gentle. He pointed to himself. "Jack, my name is Jack." Then he pointed to the boy with a questioning look. The child stared at him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. He placed a small hand on his own chest and said something that sounded like Nate. Jack smiled. "Nate, that's a good strong name." He offered the boy some water, and this time Nate took the canteen in his own hands, drinking more deeply. The fever seemed to have broken, and though the child was still weak and injured, his eyes were clearer now. Jack fed him small pieces of his remaining bread, and Nate ate slowly, never taking his eyes off the strange white man who had saved his life. As the sun rose on a new day, Jack wondered what he was going to do next. He'd used most of his water and all his food to care for the boy. He was now at least 2 days from any town, with an injured child who couldn't possibly walk and a horse that was already tired from the extra burden. They needed help, and soon. But where would it come from in this empty wilderness? He didn't have to wonder for long. As the morning light spread across the desert, Jack suddenly felt his horse tense beneath him. The Mari's ears pricked forward, and a low whinny escaped her throat. Jack's hand instinctively went to his pistol as he scanned the horizon. Then he saw them. Rising from the desert like spirits materializing from the earth itself, warriors appeared. Not just a few dozens of them, then more, on horseback and on foot, their faces painted for war, weapons in hand. Jack's blood ran cold as he counted them. 50, 70, 100. More still emerging from hidden positions among the rocks and scrub. 150 Apache warriors surrounded his small camp, and Jack Sullivan realized he was either about to die or about to witness something extraordinary. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs as the warriors closed in, forming a tightening circle around his camp. He'd heard stories about Apache warriors all his life, tales of their ferocity in battle, their legendary skill at surviving in harsh terrain, their reputation as some of the finest fighters the frontier had ever known. Now here they were, more than he'd ever seen in one place, and he was alone with nothing but a tired horse and a sick child. His first instinct was to reach for his gun, but he forced his hand to remain steady at his side. Drawing a weapon now would be suicide, and besides, something told him that if they'd wanted him dead, he would be already. These warriors had clearly been tracking him. Their positions were too strategic, too coordinated to be coincidence. They'd probably been watching since he'd found Nate, maybe even before that. The warriors on horseback sat motionless on their mounts, faces impassive. Those on foot held rifles, bows, and traditional weapons with practiced ease. Their clothing and markings indicated different ranks and clans, but all wore expressions of intense focus as they studied Jack and the boy. The morning sun glinted off painted faces and the metal of their weapons, creating an almost otherworldly scene. Then the circle parted, and 3 men rode forward. The one in the center was clearly a leader. His bearing proclaimed authority, and the eagle feathers in his hair and the elaborate beadwork on his clothing indicated high status. He appeared to be in his 50s, with a weathered face that spoke of countless battles and hard decisions. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, fixed on Jack with an intensity that made the cowboy feel as if his very soul was being examined. The leader's gaze moved from Jack to Nate, and for the first time, Jack saw emotion crack through the stern facade. The man's eyes widened slightly, and he spoke a single word in Apache that sounded like a question filled with hope and disbelief. Nate, who had been clinging to Jack's shirt in fear, suddenly recognized the voice. He cried out, a word that needed no translation, and reached toward the leader with both arms. The leader dismounted in one fluid motion and rushed to the child. He gathered Naish into his arms, and Jack watched as the fierce warrior's face transformed with relief and something that looked very much like tears threatening to fall. The man spoke rapidly in Apache, checking the boy's injuries, touching his face as if to confirm he was real. Naish spoke back, his voice weak but animated, and several times he pointed at Jack. The other warriors began to lower their weapons, and Jack felt some of the crushing tension ease from his chest. He still didn't understand what was happening, but the boy's obvious connection to this leader seemed to be working in his favor. After a long moment, the leader gently passed Naish to one of the other men, someone who appeared to be a medicine man based on the pouches and dried herbs hanging from his belt. Then the leader turned his full attention to Jack. Jack instinctively stood straighter, meeting the man's eyes despite his fear. He'd learned early in life that showing weakness to anyone, Indian or white man, was a mistake. The leader walked forward until he stood directly in front of Jack, so close that Jack could see the intricate patterns of paint on his face and the old scars that marked him as a veteran of many fights. For what felt like an eternity, they simply looked at each other. Then the leader did something Jack never expected. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of respect. When he raised his head again, he spoke in surprisingly clear English, though heavily accented. "I am Chief Cachillo of the Chiricahua Apache. The boy you saved is my grandson, Naish, son of my son who fell in battle 2 moons past. The child wandered from our camp 3 days ago during a dust storm. We have searched without rest, and many times I thought we would find only his body." The chief's voice was deep and controlled, but Jack could hear the emotion underneath. "You gave him water when you had little. You gave him food when you had less. You stayed with him when you could have ridden away. You did this even though you knew he was Apache, even though you knew it might bring you danger." Jack swallowed hard, finding his voice. "Sir, I mean Chief Cachillo, I couldn't just leave him. He was dying. Any decent person would have done the same." A slight smile touched the chief's weathered face. "No, not any person. Many of your people have ridden this trail in recent days. My warriors watched them all pass by. 3 saw my grandson. 2 crossed to the other side of the path and pretended not to see. 1 looked at him and spit on the ground before riding on. You alone stopped. You alone helped." Jack felt a chill run through him at this revelation. He'd been watched the entire time, his every action observed and judged. If he'd made a different choice, he might never have known these warriors were there, or he might have been killed for leaving the boy to die. The weight of the decision he'd made suddenly felt enormous. Chief Cachillo turned and spoke in Apache to his warriors, his voice carrying across the camp. Jack couldn't understand the words, but he caught the chief saying his name, Jack Sullivan, several times. The warriors listened intently, and Jack noticed their expressions changing from suspicious wariness to something that looked almost like approval. When the chief finished speaking, several of the warriors placed their hands over their hearts in the same gesture of respect the chief had shown. The chief turned back to Jack. "I have told my people what you did. I have told them that you are a man of honor, though you are poor in your people's gold. In our ways, a life debt must be repaid. You saved the life of my grandson, my last connection to my fallen son. This is a debt that cannot be measured in horses or weapons or even land. You gave us back our future." Jack shook his head. "Chief, you don't owe me anything. I did what anyone should do. I don't want payment or reward. I'm just glad the boy is safe." This seemed to amuse the chief. The white man's modesty. You think refusing makes you noble, but you do not understand. Among my people, refusing to accept payment for such a service would be an insult. It would shame us. You will accept our gratitude, Jack Sullivan, because honor demands it." Before Jack could respond, the medicine man approached with Naish. The child had been cleaned and had fresh bandages on his wounds. He looked much better already, though still weak. The medicine man spoke to the chief in Apache, and Cochillo nodded thoughtfully before translating for Jack. "Gray Wolf says my grandson will recover fully. The fever is broken, and the wounds will heal clean. But another day in the desert sun, without water, without food, without care, the boy would have died. Gray Wolf says you saved him with only hours to spare." The chief paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. "When my son died in battle with Mexican soldiers who crossed into our territory, I promised him I would protect his son. I promised I would raise him to be a warrior and a leader. I thought I had broken that promise when Nate wandered away. I thought the spirits had punished me for my failure. But then you appeared. A poor cowboy with nothing, who gave everything." Jack felt uncomfortable with such praise. He'd never been anyone's hero before, and the intensity of the chief's gratitude was overwhelming. "I just did what felt right, Chief. That's all." Cochillo studied him for another long moment, then made a decision. He turned and gave a series of commands in Apache. Immediately, the warriors sprang into action. Some began setting up a larger camp, erecting traditional Apache shelters with remarkable speed. Others started fires and began preparing food. Several rode off on horseback, presumably to gather supplies or send messages. The chief gestured for Jack to sit by the fire. "You will stay with us today and tonight. You will eat and rest. Your horse will be tended and fed. And tomorrow, we will discuss what can be done to repay this debt." "Chief, honestly, I don't need—" Jack began, but Cochillo held up a hand. "Peace, Jack Sullivan. You are weak from hunger and thirst. You have ridden hard and slept little. You do not even realize how close you are to collapsing. Accept our hospitality as you would from any friend." The chief's expression softened slightly. "Besides, Nate wishes to thank you properly when he is stronger. You would not deny him this." Jack looked over at the boy, who was watching him with wide, grateful eyes despite his exhaustion. He sighed and nodded. "All right, Chief. I'll stay. Thank you." As the day progressed, Jack found himself in the surreal position of being an honored guest in an Apache camp surrounded by warriors. He was given more food than he'd seen in weeks: roasted venison, corn cakes, dried fruits, and clean water from skins that seemed never-ending. His horse was taken to graze with the Apache ponies and was groomed and cared for better than Jack had ever been able to manage himself. The warriors, once they understood he was under the chief's protection, treated him with cautious respect. Some even attempted conversation in broken English, asking about his life and how he came to be traveling alone. Jack found himself telling stories about his years as a cowboy, the honest and the difficult parts both. He spoke about his father, about the poverty that had shadowed him his whole life, about the constant struggle to survive. One of the younger warriors, a man named Taza, who spoke English well, seemed particularly interested. "You have no tribe?" he asked. "No family to help you?" Jack shook his head. "My pa died when I was 20. Never knew my mother. She died birthing me. No brothers or sisters. It's just been me for a long time now." Taza looked puzzled. "The white men are strange. Among our people, no one is truly alone. The tribe is family. If a man has no blood relatives, the tribe becomes his relatives. You white men live like separate stones scattered in the desert, never touching, never supporting each other. It seems lonely." Jack considered this. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, it is lonely." As evening approached, Chief Cochillo invited Jack to sit with him and the tribal elders around the central fire. Through Taza's translation, the chief explained more about what had happened. Nate had wandered off during a severe dust storm while the camp was being moved to follow game herds. In the chaos and poor visibility, no one had noticed the boy was missing until the storm cleared. By then, he could have been anywhere in miles of territory. The entire tribe had split into search parties, but the desert was vast and Nate was small. "We were losing hope," Cochillo admitted. The warriors wanted to continue searching, but I knew in my heart we were looking for a body to bury, not a child to save. And then you appeared, like a vision sent by the spirits. A white man our people as enemy in so many ways, who showed more compassion than I dared hope for. That night, as Jack lay in a shelter the Apache had made for him, wrapped in warm blankets and with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd started yesterday as a broke cowboy, heading toward an uncertain future, and now he was sleeping in an Apache camp, surrounded by warriors who called him a friend. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his whole life poor and alone among his own people. Yet here among those his people feared and mistrusted, he'd found hospitality and honor. As he drifted toward sleep, he heard singing from the main fire, a traditional Apache song that Taza later told him was a song of gratitude to the spirits. They were singing for nature's safe return and for the stranger who had made it possible. Jack Sullivan, who had never been thanked for much of anything in his hard life, closed his eyes and felt something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. For the first time in years, he felt hope. Chief Cochillo smiled broadly, and the elders nodded in approval. The chief clasped Jack's forearm in a warrior's grip. "Then it is settled. You are no longer alone, Jack Sullivan. You are friend to the Apache. You are brother to Nate. You are part of something larger than yourself." The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. True to their word, the Apache helped Jack travel to the valley they'd promised him. When they arrived, Jack understood why they'd been willing to give it up. It was on the very edge of their traditional territory in an area that was increasingly dangerous for them to occupy due to pressure from both American settlers and Mexican forces. But for Jack, it was paradise. A stream flowed through the valley, fed by springs in the nearby hills. Cottonwood trees provided shade, and the grass grew thick and green. There was timber in the surrounding forest for building, and the valley was protected on 3 sides by rock formations that would shelter livestock from the worst weather. It was everything the chief had promised and more. The Apache didn't just point out the land and leave. Over the following weeks, warriors and families came and went, helping Jack build a modest cabin, corrals for the cattle, and a shelter for his horse. They taught him where the best grazing was, how to find water in the dry season, and which plants in the area were useful for food or medicine. The women showed him how to preserve meat and prepare foods that would last through winter. Nate came often with his grandfather, gradually growing stronger as his wounds healed. The boy was fascinated by Jack and followed him everywhere, chattering in a mix of Apache and broken English. Through these visits, Jack learned more of the language and the Apache way of life. He learned about their customs, their beliefs, their complex relationship with the land and with the spirits they believed inhabited it. But he also learned about their struggles. Taza explained how the Apache were being pushed further and further into marginal lands by American expansion. Their traditional hunting grounds were becoming ranches and towns. The game they depended on was disappearing. Conflicts with settlers and with the U.S. Army were increasing, and many Apache could see that their way of life was under threat. "This is why your friendship matters," Taza told him one evening as they worked on Jack's cabin. "You are white, but you understand us. Maybe you can help others understand too. Maybe you can help prevent more bloodshed." Jack wasn't sure he could live up to such hopes, but he was determined to try. As his cabin took shape and his small herd of cattle settled into their new home, he began to plan. The nearest town, Red Creek, was 3 days' ride away. He would need to establish himself there as a legitimate rancher, make connections, start trading. But he would do it carefully, always remembering who had made this possible. One afternoon, about a month after he'd found Nate, Chief Cochillo visited with news. "A wagon train of settlers will pass near your valley in 5 days. They are looking for land to claim. Some of them are good people. Families seeking new lives. Others ... double quotes. He shook his head. Others are the kind who see only opportunity for themselves and danger in anyone different. Jack understood the implication. You want me to meet them? Talk to them? We want you to be a presence. Let them see that a white man lives here in peace with the Apache. Let them see it is possible. What they do with that information is their choice, but at least they will know. Jack agreed, though he felt nervous about it. When the wagon train arrived, led by a grizzled trail boss named Coleman, Jack rode out to meet them. Coleman was suspicious at first, his hand never far from his rifle, but Jack's calm demeanor and obvious status as a fellow settler eventually won him over enough to talk. You're telling me you live here? Coleman asked, eyeing the valley. Right up against Apache territory? Not against it, Jack corrected. As neighbors to it. The Apache have been nothing but helpful to me. Coleman spat tobacco juice and shook his head. You're either brave or stupid, friend. Maybe both. Don't you know the Apache are dangerous? They're savages who'll kill you soon as look at you. Jack felt anger rise in his chest but kept his voice level. That's not been my experience. I found them to be honorable people who treat you the way you treat them. Maybe if more settlers approached them with respect instead of guns, there'd be less trouble. Respect? Coleman laughed harshly. You can't reason with Indians, boy. It's us or them, and it's always going to be that way. Jack realized he wasn't going to change Coleman's mind, and trying would only create animosity. Well, I'm just letting you know there's a ranch here now. If you need anything as you pass through, I'm willing to trade fairly. But this land is spoken for, and the Apache consider it protected. Just thought you should know. Some of the settlers in the wagon train seemed intrigued by Jack's words, particularly a few families with children who looked exhausted from the journey. But Coleman hurried them along, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. As they left, Jack noticed one wagon lingering behind a young couple with two small daughters. The man called out, "Thank you for the information, friend. It's good to know there are reasonable folk out here." Jack waved back, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. He hadn't converted anyone or solved the larger conflicts, but he planted a seed. Perhaps that was enough for now. That night, as he sat outside his new cabin watching the stars, Jack reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from a poor, friendless drifter to a landowner with allies and purpose, all because he'd made one simple choice to help a child in need. He didn't know if he could be the bridge between peoples that Chief Cochillo hoped for. He didn't know if his little ranch would survive or if the fragile peace between settlers and Apache would hold. But for the first time in his life, Jack Sullivan had hope for tomorrow, and that was worth more than all the gold in California. The months that followed were the hardest work Jack had ever done, but also the most satisfying. His small herd of 20 cattle grew as calves were born, and he carefully managed the grazing to keep the valley's grass healthy. He planted a garden with seeds traded from passing travelers, and with tubers the Apache showed him how to cultivate. His cabin, modest as it was, became a real home, the first he'd had since his father died. But success brought attention, not all of it welcome. In Red Creek, where Jack went monthly to trade beef and hides for supplies, word spread about the cowboy who lived in peace with the Apache. Some saw him as a curiosity, others as a fool, and a few as something worse, a traitor to his race. Jack learned to ignore the hostile stares and whispered comments, focusing instead on building relationships with the few merchants who were willing to trade fairly. One such ally was Samuel Chun, a Chinese immigrant who ran the general store. Sam had faced his own share of prejudice and recognized a kindred spirit in Jack. People fear what they don't understand, Sam told him one day as Jack purchased flour and coffee. You're showing them something different, something that challenges their beliefs. That makes you dangerous in their eyes. I'm not trying to be dangerous, Jack replied, counting out his carefully saved coins. I'm just trying to live. Sometimes living differently is the most dangerous thing you can do. Sam said wisely. Be careful, my friend. There are men in this town who don't like what you represent. Sam's warning proved prophetic. Late one autumn afternoon, as Jack was working on reinforcing his corral, he spotted riders approaching 5 men, heavily armed, led by a thick-set rancher named Virgil Crenshaw. Jack had seen Crenshaw in Red Creek and had heard he owned a large spread to the west. The man had a reputation for being ruthless in business and brutal to anyone who crossed him. Jack wiped his hands on his pants and walked out to meet them, keeping his expression neutral despite the tension coiling in his gut. Crenshaw sat his horse with the confidence of a man used to getting his way, his cold eyes surveying Jack's property with obvious calculation. You must be Sullivan, Crenshaw said without preamble. The Indian lover everyone's talking about. Jack kept his voice steady. I'm Jack Sullivan. I don't know about the rest. Can I help you gentlemen with something? You can start by explaining what the hell you think you're doing out here, Crenshaw said, his tone aggressive. This is good land, water access, plenty of grass. Land like this shouldn't be in the hands of some nobody who's making deals with savages. I'm ranching, same as anyone, Jack replied. The land was unclaimed when I settled here. I've got as much right to it as anyone else. Crenshaw leaned forward in his saddle. That's where you're wrong, boy. You don't have any rights. You've got no deed, no legal claim registered with the territorial office. And you're sitting on land right next to Apache territory, which makes you either stupid or working with them. Either way, it's a problem. Jack felt his jaw tighten. I'm not looking for trouble, Mr. Crenshaw. I work hard, mind my own business, and treat my neighbors with respect. I'd appreciate the same courtesy. One of Crenshaw's men, a scarred gunman with mean eyes, laughed. Neighbors? You think those savages are your neighbors? Oh boy, they were probably just waiting for the right time to slit your throat and take everything you got. That hasn't been my experience, Jack said carefully. The Apache have been nothing but honorable in their dealings with me. Crenshaw's expression darkened. You know what I think? I think you're either in league with them, maybe even helping them plan raids on honest settlers, or you're so damn stupid you don't realize you're being used. Either way, you're a liability to everyone trying to build a life in this territory. I'm not helping anyone raid anything, Jack said, his own anger rising now. I'm just trying to build a life, same as anyone. If that bothers you, I'm sorry, but I'm not leaving. We'll see about that, Crenshaw said ominously. He signaled to his men, and they wheeled their horses around. But before leaving, Crenshaw turned back. You've been warned, Sullivan. This valley is too valuable to waste on someone like you. You'd be smart to pack up and move on before something unfortunate happens. As they rode away, Jack felt his hands shaking with suppressed rage and fear. It wasn't an idle threat man like Crenshaw didn't make empty promises. Jack had seen this play out before, had heard stories of small ranchers being driven off their land by bigger operations through intimidation, violence, or illegal maneuvering. That evening, Taza arrived with 2 other warriors. They'd been watching from the hills and had seen Crenshaw's visit. That man is dangerous, Taza said without preamble. We know of him. He has driven Apache from their camps with his armed men. He kills without mercy and takes what he wants. I figured as much, Jack said, pouring coffee for his visitors. But what can I do? If I fight him, he'll bring the law down on me, claim I'm the aggressor. And he's right about one thing. I don't have legal papers for this land. Then get them, Taza suggested. Ride to the territorial office. File your claim properly. Make it legal by their laws. Jack considered this. That's a week's journey there and back. And it costs money I don't have. Filing fees, surveyor costs. I'd need at least $100, probably more. The warriors conferred among themselves in Apache. Then Taza spoke again. Chief Cachillo will provide the money. This land was our gift to you. We will not let it be stolen by men like Crenshaw. I can't ask you to, Jack began, but Taza cut him off. You are not asking. We are offering. This is still part of the debt we owe you. Besides, if Crenshaw takes this land, he will push further into our territory. Better to have you here, someone we trust, than him. Jack accepted gratefully, though it galled him to need help yet again. Within 2 days, Chief Cuchillo arrived with a leather pouch containing gold coins, enough to file his claim and pay for a survey. Use it well, the chief said. Make your claim strong so that no one can dispute it. Jack set out immediately for the territorial capital, a grueling journey that took him through rough country and required sleeping rough. When he finally reached the land office, he found a bureaucratic maze of paperwork and regulations. But with Sam Chun as advice, the shopkeeper had written him a letter of introduction. To a Chinese clerk who worked in the office, Jack navigated the system. The clerk, a young man named Wei, helped him understand the process. You'll need to prove you've improved the land, Wei explained. Show that you've built structures, are running livestock, have made it productive. You'll need witnesses to swear you've been in continuous occupation. I've got witnesses, Jack said, thinking of the Apache and the few friendly settlers he'd met. Wei hesitated. Official witnesses, meaning white settlers in good standing. Indian testimony won't be accepted, I'm sorry to say. This was a problem Jack hadn't anticipated. He had few connections among the white settlers, and those he did have were tentative at best. But he remembered the young couple from the wagon train who had stopped to thank him. If he could find them, if they'd settled somewhere nearby, perhaps they'd speak for him. It took 3 days of asking around, but Jack eventually tracked down the couple, Thomas and Mary Brennan, who had claimed land about 15 miles south of his valley. They remembered him and, after hearing his situation, agreed to serve as witnesses. You were kind to us when we passed through, Thomas said. And Mary and I believe in treating people fairly, Indian or white. If you're working that land honestly, you've got our support. With their testimony and the evidence of his improvements, Jack filed his claim. The surveyor would come in the spring to establish official boundaries, but the clerk assured him that his application was solid. Keep your receipt, Wei advised. And if anyone tries to dispute your claim before the survey is complete, you show them this. It proves you filed first. Jack rode back to his valley with a sense of relief, but also awareness that he'd only bought himself time. Crenshaw wouldn't give up easily, and legal papers might not be enough to stop a man who operated outside the law when it suited him. His instincts proved correct. Less than a week after his return, Jack woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. He burst from his cabin to see his hay barn engulfed in flames. He ran to save what he could, but the fire was too far advanced. By the time it burned out, he'd lost his winter hay store's months of work and a critical resource for keeping his cattle fed through the cold months. There was no direct evidence of arson, but Jack knew. The fire had started too conveniently, too completely. This was Crenshaw's answer to his illegal filing. If he couldn't take the land legally, he'd make it impossible for Jack to survive on it. The next morning, Chief Cuchillo arrived with 24 warriors. They'd seen the smoke and had come to investigate. When Jack explained what had happened, the chief's expression turned grim. "This will not stand," he declared. "You are under our protection. An attack on you is an attack on us. Chief, I appreciate that, but if the Apache retaliate against Crenshaw, it'll start a war. The army will get involved, and innocent people on both sides will die. That's not what I want. Then, what do you propose?" Cuchillo asked. "That we stand by while this man destroys you?" Jack thought hard. "Let me try something first. Let me go to Red Creek and speak to the sheriff. File a complaint. If the law won't help me, then we'll consider other options. But let's try the white man's justice first." Cuchillo agreed reluctantly, though he insisted that Taza accompany Jack as far as the edge of town. When Jack arrived at the sheriff's office, he found a tired-looking man in his 50s named Ben Walsh. Jack explained about the fire and his Suspicions about Crenshaw. Walsh listened, then shook his head. Jack, even if Crenshaw did this, and I'm not saying he did, you got no proof. No witnesses, no evidence. I can't arrest a man just on your suspicions, especially not a man with Crenshaw's influence. So he can just destroy my property, and there's nothing you can do? I'm not saying that, Walsh said, looking uncomfortable. I'm saying I need evidence. You bring me something solid, and I'll act on it. But suspicions ain't enough. Jack left the office frustrated and angry. The system he'd hoped would protect him was failing, just as Crenshaw probably knew it would. As he walked back to where Taza waited with the horses, he noticed a commotion outside the saloon. A crowd had gathered, and voices were raised in argument. Curious, Jack pushed through to see what was happening. In the center of the crowd, a young Apache boy, no more than 15, was on his knees, his hands bound, blood running from his nose. Standing over him was one of Crenshaw's men, the scarred gunman, holding a whip. Found this savage trying to steal from Mr. Crenshaw's storehouse, the gunman was announcing to the crowd. Figure he deserves a lesson before we turn him over to the army. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some shouted for the beating to continue. Others looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Jack felt his blood boil. The boy was terrified, and whether he'd been stealing or not, this wasn't justice. It was cruelty. Before he could think better of it, Jack stepped forward. That's enough. The boy's already hurt. Take him to the sheriff if you think he's committed a crime. The gunman turned to Jack with a sneer. Well, if it ain't the Indian lover himself, this ain't your business, Sullivan. Step back unless you want some of the same. I'm making it my business, Jack said, his hand hovering near his pistol. You're not whipping anyone in the street like an animal. Not while I'm standing here. The gunman's eyes narrowed, and his hand moved toward his own gun. The crowd went silent, sensing violence about to erupt. Jack's heart hammered, but he held his ground. He'd never been a fast draw or a skilled gunfighter. If this came to shooting, he'd likely die. But something in him refused to back down, refused to watch this injustice happen without acting. Then a voice cut through the tension. Everyone calm down. Sheriff Walsh pushed through the crowd, his hand on his own weapon. Jeb, you put that whip away. The boy's coming with me to the jail until we sort this out. Jack, you step back. This doesn't need to get bloody. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Crenshaw himself emerged from the crowd. Do what the sheriff says, Jeb. We'll handle this legally. His eyes locked with Jack's cold and promising retribution. Seems Mr. Sullivan here is very concerned about following the law. We'll be sure to accommodate him. Jeb reluctantly stepped back, and Walsh took custody of the young Apache. As the crowd dispersed, Jack felt Taza's hand on his shoulder. That was brave but foolish, the warrior said quietly. You've made a powerful enemy even angrier. I know, Jack said, watching Crenshaw disappear back into the saloon. But I couldn't just stand there. As they rode back toward the valley, Jack realized that the confrontation in Red Creek had changed everything. This was no longer just about his land or his survival. It had become about what kind of man he was willing to be, what principles he was willing to fight for. Crenshaw wouldn't stop until Jack was gone or dead, and the law clearly wasn't going to protect him. That night, sitting with Chief Cuchillo and the elders, Jack faced the hard truth. War's coming whether we want it or not, he said. Crenshaw won't stop, and men like him won't be satisfied until all the Apache are gone, and people like me are too scared to stand against them. Cuchillo nodded gravely. Then we must be ready. But we will fight smartly, not rashly. We will use strength and strategy together. What do you mean? Jack asked. The chief smiled, though there was no humor in it. You will see. Sometimes the best way to fight a powerful enemy is to show them they are not as powerful as they think. And sometimes the best weapon is not a gun or a knife, but fear. Jack didn't fully understand what the chief meant, but he trusted the old warrior's wisdom. As he rode back to his valley that night, he knew that the peaceful life he'd been building was over. The confrontation he'd been trying to avoid was coming, and when it arrived, it would test everything he'd learned and everyone he'd come to care about. The autumn winds carried the scent of coming winter, and with it, the promise of violence that would determine not just Jack's fate, but the fate of the fragile bridge he'd been trying to build between two worlds. The Apache boy Jack had defended, whose name was Chayton, was released 2 days later when Sheriff Walsh couldn't find evidence of theft, but the damage was done. Crenshaw had made his position clear. Anyone who sided with the Apache was his enemy, and Jack had publicly chosen his side in front of the entire town. The retaliation came swiftly. 3 of Jack's cattle were found dead in his north pasture, shot and left to rot. His garden was trampled. Someone cut his fence lines, forcing him to spend days rounding up scattered livestock. Each incident was small enough to avoid serious law enforcement attention, but together they were slowly bleeding Jack's resources and energy. Chief Cochillo kept warriors posted nearby, watching over the valley, but Jack insisted they remain hidden. If Crenshaw sees Apache warriors, he'll claim I'm harboring hostile Indians and bring the army down on us, Jack explained. We have to be smarter than that. It was Naish who first suggested the plan, speaking through Taza. The boy had grown considerably in the months since Jack had saved him, and his young mind was sharp. My grandfather says white men fear the Apache because they fight like ghosts, Taza translated. They attack from nowhere and disappear. But they also fear Apache because of stories of our numbers, our fierceness, our revenge. Maybe we use those stories. Chief Cochillo expanded on his grandson's idea. Crenshaw thinks he faces one poor cowboy and perhaps a few Apache allies. He believes he can overwhelm you through simple force. But what if he believes something different? What if he believed that attacking you would bring the wrath of many tribes, not just the Chiricahua? You mean make him think I have more support than I do? Jack asked. Not make him think, Cochillo corrected with a sly smile. Show him. Tomorrow, you will have visitors. Many visitors. Jack didn't fully understand until the next day when riders began arriving at his valley. Not just Chiricahua Apache, but warriors from other bands and tribes, some who had traveled for days. Cochillo had sent word through the complex network of tribal connections, calling in favors and making alliances. Word had spread about the white cowboy who had saved a chief's grandson and who now faced persecution for befriending the Apache. By sunset, nearly 100 warriors had gathered in Jack's valley. They made no effort to hide their presence. In fact, they did the opposite. They built large fires that would be visible for miles, sang war songs that carried on the wind, and rode in formations along the ridges where anyone watching would see them. Taza explained the strategy. Crenshaw will hear of this. His men will report that the Apache have gathered in force at your ranch. He will not know whether they are here to defend you or to plan attacks on him. He will fear. And fear makes men either retreat or make mistakes. The display continued for 3 days. During that time, more warriors arrived Mescalero, Jicarilla, even a small group of Lipan Apache who had heard the story and wanted to stand with their brothers. The actual fighting force probably numbered around 150 warriors at its peak, but the constant movement and the strategic use of fires and signals made it appear there might be many more. On the third night, Chief Cochillo gathered the leaders around Jack's fire. We have shown our strength, he said. Now we will show our unity. Tomorrow, at dawn, we ride to Red Creek. Not to fight, not to threaten, but to be seen. Let every settler in that town see that the Apaches stand together, and that you, Jack Sullivan, stand with us. Jack felt his stomach nod. Chief, riding into town with a force of warriors. That could be seen as an act of war. Only if we make it one, Cochillo replied. We will ride in peace, carrying no weapons beyond what any man carries for protection. We will buy supplies, trade fairly, and conduct ourselves with dignity. But we will do it together, all of us, so that everyone sees the truth. The Apache are not scattered, afraid, or easily pushed aside. And neither are you. The next morning, as the sun rose, the sight was extraordinary. 150 Apache warriors, painted for ceremony rather than war, mounted on their finest horses, formed up around Jack's small ranch. They rode in organized groups, each led by their tribal representatives, with Jack and Chief Cuchillo at the head of the formation. The ride to Red Creek took several hours, and Jack's nerves stretched tighter with each mile. This was either the boldest or the stupidest thing he'd ever been part of. But as he glanced at Nate, who rode proudly beside his grandfather, and at Taza, whose face showed determination rather than fear, Jack felt his own courage strengthen. They arrived at Red Creek at mid-morning, when the town was fully awake and bustling. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. People stopped in their tracks, mouths open. Women grabbed their children and hurried indoors. Men reached for weapons but didn't draw them, uncertain what to do in the face of such a large but non-threatening force. Sheriff Walsh came running out of his office, his face pale. "What in the hell is this?" he demanded, though he carefully kept his hands away from his guns. Chief Cuchillo dismounted and walked forward, gesturing for Jack to join him. "We come in peace, Sheriff Walsh," the chief said in his careful English. "We come to trade, to buy supplies, and to show that the Apache are united in friendship with Jack Sullivan. We mean no harm to your town or your people, unless harm is meant to us." Walsh looked from Cuchillo to Jack to the assembled warriors and back again. "This is ... highly irregular. You can't just ride into town with an army." "It is not an army," Cuchillo corrected. "It is a gathering of free peoples who wish to trade. Is there a law against this?" Walsh opened his mouth, then closed it again. Technically, there wasn't, not if they weren't making threats or committing crimes. But the sheer presence of so many Apache warriors in a frontier town was unprecedented and terrifying to most of the residents. "I want to buy supplies from Sam Chine's store," Jack said loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "And my Apache friends here want to trade pelts and crafts for goods. We'll do it peacefully, pay fair prices, and then we'll leave. Nobody needs to get hurt or scared." The standoff lasted several tense minutes before Sam Chun himself emerged from his store. The Chinese merchant looked at the assembled warriors, then at Jack, and made a decision. "My store is open for business," he called out. "All customers are welcome if they come in peace and pay honestly." It was the breakthrough needed. Over the next several hours, small groups of warriors entered the store while the rest waited outside in disciplined formation. They traded furs, beadwork, and Apache silver for flour, sugar, coffee, and other goods. Sam conducted business as he always did, fairly and without prejudice. Other merchants, seeing Sam's success and realizing these customers had valuable goods to trade, began to open their stores as well. Not all many remained closed, their proprietors watching fearfully from behind curtains, but enough to make the point that peaceful commerce between Apache and settlers was possible. Crenshaw, of course, didn't take this well. He emerged from the saloon with his men, his face red with fury. "What the hell is this circus?" he demanded. "Walsh, you're allowing savages to just waltz into town like they own the place?" "They're trading peacefully," Walsh said, and Jack could hear the relief in the sheriff's voice that no violence had erupted. "I got no legal grounds to stop them from conducting business." "Legal grounds?" Crenshaw sputtered. "They're Indians. They don't have rights to conduct business here." "Actually, they do," came a new voice. A well-dressed man in his 40s stepped forward, someone Jack hadn't seen before. "I'm Daniel Crawford, territorial judge, passing through on circuit court business. And these people have every right to engage in lawful commerce. The treaties don't prohibit trade, and if the merchants are willing, then there's no violation of law." Crenshaw's face grew even redder. "This is because of him," He pointed at Jack. Sullivan's behind this, turning the Indians against honest settlers. I haven't turned anyone against anyone, Jack said calmly, though his heart was pounding. I've just treated the Apache with the same respect I want for myself. Maybe if more people tried that, there'd be less conflict. You're a traitor to your race, Crenshaw shouted. Consorting with savages, probably helping them plan raids. Careful with your accusations, Mr. Crenshaw, Judge Crawford interrupted. Slander is also against the law. If you have evidence of criminal activity, present it to the sheriff. Otherwise, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Chief Cuchillo stepped forward, commanding attention with his mere presence. We have finished our business here, he announced. We will leave your town in peace, as we came. But let all know this. Jack Sullivan is under the protection of the Apache nations. Any harm that comes to him will be answered by all of us, together. This is our oath. With that declaration hanging in the air, the warriors began their organized withdrawal from town. They rode out in the same disciplined formation they'd arrived in, leaving Red Creek citizens to process what had just happened. As they traveled back toward the valley, Taza rode up beside Jack. Do you understand what the chief did today? Made a statement, Jack said. Showed that I have powerful allies. More than that, Taza explained. He made an oath in front of white witnesses, including a judge. In our law, and in yours, that oath has weight. Crenshaw now knows that attacking you means war with multiple Apache bands. That is not a war he can win, and not one the army wants to fight. You are much safer now than you were this morning. Jack hoped that was true, but he also worried about what he just witnessed. We've escalated things. Forced Crenshaw into a corner. Cornered animals are dangerous. Yes, Taza agreed. Which is why we must be ready for his response. He will not accept this defeat easily. They didn't have to wait long. That night, riders were spotted near Jack's Valley Scouts from Crenshaw's ranch, surveying the area. The Apache warriors, still camped nearby, tracked them but didn't engage. Over the next 2 days, more scouts appeared, and the Apache counted at least 20 of Crenshaw's men gathering at his ranch. Chief Cuchillo called a council. He is planning an attack. A large one. He means to strike hard enough to either kill you or drive you away forever. Consequences be damned. Then we fortify and prepare, Jack said. We make my ranch defensible and wait for him to make his move. But one of the elder chiefs, a man named Gray Fox, who led a Mescalero band, shook his head. Waiting for an attack puts you on defense, always reacting. Better to act first, but without bloodshed if possible. What do you suggest? Jack asked. Gray Fox smiled. We let him come, but we make sure he knows he is walking into a trap. We show our strength so completely that he retreats without a fight. Sometimes the greatest victory is the battle that never happens. Over the next day, the Apache transformed Jack's Valley into a fortress. Warriors dug defensive positions in the surrounding hills. They stationed lookouts at every approach. They positioned their horses and supplies strategically, creating the appearance of an even larger force than they had. And they waited. Crenshaw's attack came 3 nights later. 30 armed men rode toward the valley under cover of darkness, clearly intending to strike at Jack's cabin while he slept. But they never made it. As they entered the narrow approach to the valley, torches suddenly blazed to life all around them. Dozens of them, hundreds it seemed, carried by Apache warriors who materialized from the darkness like spirits. The riders found themselves surrounded, trapped in a killing ground with warriors above them on the rocks, ahead of them on the trail, and behind them cutting off retreat. Chief Cuchillo's voice rang out in the night, speaking English so Crenshaw's men would understand. You come to murder in the darkness like cowards, but you are seen, you are known. Every face here will be remembered. Turn back now or face the consequences. Crenshaw himself was among the riders, and in the torchlight Jack could see the man's face go pale as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. He was outnumbered at least 4-1 in unfavorable terrain, with warriors holding every advantage. The fight would be suicide. "This isn't over, Sullivan," Crenshaw shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can't hide behind Indians forever." "I'm not hiding," Jack called back, riding forward to the edge of the trap. "I'm living my life in peace with my neighbors. You're the one who keeps bringing violence." Ask yourself why. For a long moment, the two forces faced each other. Then Crenshaw, seeing no path to victory, made the wise choice. "Fall back," he ordered his men. "But remember this," he called to Jack as they began their retreat. "The Apache won't always be here to protect you. One day you'll be alone again, and I'll be waiting." The warriors let them go, though they tracked them all the way back to Crenshaw's ranch to ensure they didn't circle back. It was a victory, but Jack knew it was only temporary. Men like Crenshaw didn't forgive being humiliated, and the confrontation had been witnessed by 30 of his men. His reputation had taken a serious blow. As the warriors celebrated their bloodless victory, Jack sat with Chief Cochillo, watching the stars. "He'll try again," Jack said quietly. "Maybe not soon, maybe not the same way, but he won't let this go." Perhaps, Cochillo agreed. Or perhaps he will realize the cost is too high. Time will tell. But tonight, you are safe. Your land is secure. And you have shown that standing for what is right can bring unexpected allies. These warriors came from far away, not just to help me repay a debt, but because your story inspired them. The white man who saved a child and refused to be moved by greed or fear, that is a story worth defending. Jack thought about the long chain of events that had led him here, from finding a dying boy in the desert to standing at the center of a conflict between two cultures. He'd never wanted to be a hero or a symbol. He'd just wanted to do the right thing. But sometimes, doing the right thing meant accepting responsibilities you never sought. As the celebration continued around him, Jack made a silent promise to himself and to all those who had stood with him. He would not abandon the bridge he'd been building between the Apache and the settlers. He would not let fear or violence drive him away. He would prove that there was another way, even if it took the rest of his life to do it. The fight wasn't over. He knew that. But for tonight, surrounded by warriors who called him brother and protecting land that had become his home, Jack Sullivan allowed himself to feel hope. And sometimes, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. Winter came to the valley with unusual gentleness, as if nature itself was granting a respite after the tensions of autumn. Snow dusted the hills, but didn't bury them, and the creek continued to flow, providing water for Jack's growing herd. The Apache warriors gradually returned to their own territories, though small groups remained nearby, a continued presence that discouraged further aggression from Crenshaw. In Red Creek, the story of the confrontation spread quickly. Opinions remained divided, but something had shifted. The Apaches' disciplined behavior during their visit to town, their willingness to trade fairly, and their restraint during the nighttime confrontation had challenged the prevailing narrative that they were mindless savages. Not everyone changed their views, but enough people began questioning whether the constant conflict was inevitable or if there might be another path. Samuel Chun reported the changes to Jack during one of his supply runs. "People are talking," the shopkeeper said, organizing Jack's purchases. "Some still hate you, think you're a fool or worse. But others ... they're curious. They saw that the Apache didn't raid, didn't kill, didn't do any of the things they were afraid of. It's making them wonder." "And Crenshaw?" Jack asked. Sam's expression darkened. Still angry, still dangerous. But he's been quieter. Some of his own men left after that night, said they didn't sign on to start a war with the Indians. His reputation's taken a hit. He's no longer the biggest man in the territory, and that's eating at him. The territorial surveyor arrived in late winter to officially establish Jack's boundaries. The man, a thorough professional named Edwards, spent 3 days measuring and marking, then filed his report confirming Jack's legal claim to the valley. When Jack received his official deed, properly registered and stamped, it felt like something solid after months of uncertainty. That piece of paper won't stop Crenshaw if he's determined, Sheriff Walsh warned when Jack showed him the deed. But it makes it harder for him to use legal means against you. He'd have to challenge your claim in court, and from what I hear, you got witnesses and documentation that'd be hard to dispute. Spring brought new life to the valley and new challenges for Jack. His cattle had multiplied, and he needed to plan for the future, how to expand sustainably, where to sell his beef, how to build relationships with other ranchers who might be willing to trade. He also needed to think about the long term. Was he content to remain a small-time rancher, or did he have larger ambitions? The answer came unexpectedly through Judge Crawford, who returned to the area on another circuit court visit. The judge sought Jack out, riding to the valley with a proposal. "I've been thinking about what I witnessed last fall," Crawford said as they sat in Jack's cabin. "The gathering of Apache tribes, the peaceful resolution of what could have been a bloodbath. It struck me that what this territory needs is more bridges between communities, more examples of cooperation instead of conflict. I'm not sure I did anything special," Jack said. "I just treated people decently." "That's precisely the point," Crawford replied. "Common decency seems rare on this frontier. Everyone is so caught up in taking what they can and protecting it at all costs that they've forgotten how to be neighbors. But you've shown it's possible." He leaned forward. "I want to propose something. The territorial government is looking for intermediaries, people who can facilitate communication between settlers and Indian tribes, help resolve disputes before they turn violent. Given your unique relationship with the Apache, you'd be ideal for such a role." Jack was taken aback. "Me? I'm no diplomat or government official. I'm just a rancher." "You're a man both sides trust, which is rarer than you think," Crawford said. "The position would come with a small salary, not much, but enough to supplement your ranching income. You'd help negotiate trade agreements, mediate disputes, provide accurate information to both sides so they're not acting on rumor and fear. Think about it." Jack did think about it, long and hard. He discussed it with Chief Cachillo, who saw the value. "You could prevent many misunderstandings," the chief said. "Too often, our peoples fight because of lies and fear, because no one speaks both languages and both truths. You could be that bridge." He also discussed it with Nate, who had become like a younger brother to him. The boy was nearly 10 now, growing strong and smart. "You should do it," Nate said in his improving English. "My grandfather says you save me to save many others. This is how you do it." Jack accepted the position in early summer. His first assignment was to help negotiate grazing rights between several Apache bands and new settlers who had claimed land near traditional hunting grounds. It was delicate work requiring patience and trust from both sides, but slowly, carefully. He helped them reach an agreement. The settlers would leave certain areas undisturbed during specific seasons, and the Apache would not interfere with the settlers' established ranches. It wasn't perfect, and not everyone was happy, but it prevented violence and showed that compromise was possible. Word of the successful negotiations spread, and soon Jack found himself called to other disputes. He mediated water rights disagreements, helped establish trade routes, and even assisted in recovering stolen livestock on both sides. Sometimes settlers' cattle had wandered onto Apache land sometimes. Apache horses had been taken by raiders, and Jack worked to return property rather than escalate tensions. His ranch continued to prosper, though he spent less time there than he'd originally imagined. He hired 2 hands young men who needed work and who were willing to learn his way of doing things, which included treating any Apache visitors with respect. One was Tom Brennan's younger brother, Michael, who had heard about Jack's stand against Crenshaw and wanted to work for someone with principles. The other was a freed slave named Isaiah Washington, who had drifted west after the war and found that prejudice followed him everywhere until he reached Jack's Valley, where a man was judged by his character rather than his color. "Never thought I'd find a place like this," Isaiah told Jack one evening as they mended fence together. White man, black man, and Indians all working together. "Folks back east wouldn't believe it if I told them. I'm not sure I believe it myself sometimes," Jack admitted. "But it works because everyone here actually wants it to work. That's the difference." The summer brought an unexpected challenge that would test everything Jack had built. A group of Apache warriors, young and angry about encroachments on their land, raided a settlement 40 miles south, killing 3 settlers and burning homes. It was exactly the kind of incident that usually sparks cycles of revenge and escalating violence. The territorial governor sent for Jack immediately. "We need you to make contact with the Apache leaders," the governor said, his face grave. "The army is mobilizing, and there are settlers forming vigilante groups. If we don't stop this quickly, we'll have a full-scale war, and innocent people on both sides will die." Jack rode hard to find Chief Cuchillo, bringing word of the raid and the response it had triggered. The old chief's face was troubled. These young warriors did not have permission for this raid. They acted from anger, not wisdom. "But they are Apache, and we cannot simply turn them over to your law. They would be hanged. If you don't do something, hundreds could die," Jack pleaded. "The army is coming, and you know they don't distinguish between peaceful Apache and raiders. They'll attack any camp they find." For 2 days, Jack shuttled between the Apache camps and the territorial officials, carrying messages, proposing solutions, arguing for patience and justice rather than vengeance. The young raiders, faced with the consequences of their actions and pressure from their own elders, finally agreed to meet with Jack and a territorial judge. The negotiation was the hardest thing Jack had ever done. The settlers who had lost family members wanted blood. The Apache warriors were defiant, claiming they'd only responded to previous wrongs. And the army officers wanted a simple, violent solution that would teach the Indians a lesson. Jack stood in the middle of all this fury and grief and spoke from his heart. "I know about loss," he told the grieving settlers. "I know about anger. And I know it's easier to kill than to heal. But I also know that if we start down the revenge path, where does it end? How many more families lose fathers and sons before we all admit that killing each other didn't solve anything?" To the young Apache warriors, he said, "You wanted to strike back for injustices done to your people. I understand. But you killed men who had nothing to do with those injustices. You made widows and orphans. Is that the warrior's way? Is that honor?" To the army officers, he said, "You have the power to destroy, no question. You can ride into Apache territory and kill everyone you find. But will that bring peace? Or will it just guarantee that your children and your children's children will be fighting this same war?" The compromise they finally reached satisfied no one completely, which probably meant it was fair. The young raiders would work as laborers for 2 years, helping rebuild what they destroyed and providing restitution to the victims' families. They would be supervised but not imprisoned. The Apache elders agreed to be responsible for them and to pay additional compensation in horses and goods. And the army agreed to halt its mobilization and instead focus on tracking down actual criminal raiders rather than punishing all Apache indiscriminately. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was better than war. The families of the killed settlers were not entirely satisfied, but some found solace in knowing the raiders would face consequences and that they'd receive compensation. The Apache avoided a catastrophic military campaign, and the young warriors, humbled by the process, came to understand the true cost of their actions. In the months that followed, Jack's reputation grew throughout the territory. He became known as the mediator, the man who could walk between worlds. His ranch became a neutral meeting ground where disputes could be discussed safely. Apache and settlers both began to bring their conflicts to him, trusting him to be fair even when the solutions were difficult. Crenshaw, interestingly, faded from the picture. Some said his own ranch was failing due to poor management and his inability to hire good. Hand's word had gotten around about how he treated people, and skilled cowboys avoided working for him. Others said he'd been warned by territorial officials that any further aggression toward Jack Sullivan would result in serious legal consequences, given Jack's new semi-official status. Whatever the reason, Crenshaw eventually sold his ranch at a loss and moved to California, still bitter but defeated. One autumn day, nearly 2 years after Jack had found Nash dying in the desert, Chief Cochillo visited with his grandson. The boy was thriving, almost 12 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of the leader he would become. They sat together on Jack's porch, watching the sun set over the valley. "Do you remember what I told you that first morning?" Cochillo asked. "That the debt we owed you could not be measured in horses or weapons or land?" "I remember," Jack said. "Though you gave me all those things anyway." The chief smiled. "We gave you a start. But what you built from that start, the bridges between peoples, the peace you have helped maintain, the example you have set, then is worth more than anything we could have given. You have become what we hoped, a man who shows others a different way." Nash spoke up, his English now fluent. "My grandfather says that when I am grown and become chief, I will need advisors who understand both the Apache way and the white man's way. He says you will be my advisor if you agree." Jack looked at the serious young face, seeing echoes of the dying child he'd saved. "I'd be honored, though I hope when that day comes, there will be less need for mediation and more simple friendship between our peoples." "That is my hope, too," Cochillo said. "But whether that day comes or not, you have already changed the future. The warriors who stood with you that day, who saw that peace was possible, they returned to their camps and told stories. Those stories are spreading among all the Apache bands, among other tribes as well. The story of the poor cowboy who chose compassion over self-interest, who treated others with dignity regardless of their race, who proved that one person's choice can matter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd started with nothing, no family, no money, no prospects. He'd been one decision away from walking past a dying child and continuing his lonely path to nowhere. But he'd stopped. He'd given away his last food and water. He'd chosen kindness when it cost him everything. And that single choice had transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The valley that had been given to him was now home to a small but growing community. His 2 ranch hands had brought their families. A few other settlers had built near his land, drawn by the peace and prosperity they saw there. Apache families visited regularly, trading goods and sharing meals. Michael and Isaiah had both married, Michael to a settler girl from Red Creek, Isaiah to a freedwoman who had come west seeking opportunity. Both couples were building homes on the edge of Jack's property, with his blessing and help. There was talk of building a school, a church, maybe even a small trading post. The valley was becoming more than just Jack's ranch. It was becoming a community built on the principles he'd accidentally championed. Judge Crawford visited regularly now, using Jack's ranch as a base when handling cases in the region. "You've created something remarkable here," the judge told him during one visit. "A place where the rules are simple. Treat people fairly, contribute to the community, and respect differences. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but in this time and place, it is." Not everyone approved, of course. There were still settlers who viewed Jack with suspicion or contempt, who saw his friendship with the Apache as betrayal. There were Apache warriors who distrusted any white man, regardless of his actions. And there were opportunists on both sides who preferred conflict because they profited from it. But slowly, steadily, the example Jack had set began to spread. Other ranchers started trading with Apache bands, finding that commerce was more profitable than conflict. A few brave settlers began learning Apache language and customs. Some Apache young people started learning English and the ways of the white man's law, seeing it as a tool for protecting their rights rather than just an instrument of oppression. The territorial governor, impressed by the relative peace in Jack's region compared to the violence plaguing other areas, appointed him as the official liaison to the Apache nations, a paid position with actual authority. It came with a small office in Red Creek and a deputy to help with the administrative work. Jack hired Taza for the position, making him the first Apache to hold an official government post in the territory. "We are making history," Taza said on his first day, somewhat bemused by the paperwork involved. "Though I thought history would involve more horses and less riding." Sam Chun expanded his store and opened a second location closer to Jack's Valley, specifically to facilitate trade with the Apache. "Best business decision I ever made," Sam told Jack. "The Apache are honest traders, they pay their debts, and they bring goods I can't get anywhere else. Why more merchants don't see this opportunity, I'll never understand." 5 years after finding Nate, Jack received a letter that would change things again. It was from a newspaper editor in San Francisco who had heard stories about the Cowboy mediator and wanted to write about him. At first, Jack was reluctant. He'd never sought fame or attention. But Chief Cachillo convinced him otherwise. "Your story needs to be told," the chief said. "Not for your glory, but so others can learn. There are good people throughout this land who believe peace is impossible, who think the only option is for one side to defeat the other. Your story proved them wrong. It shows that another path exists." Jack agreed to the interview, and the resulting article, published in newspapers throughout the West and even back east, was titled "The Bridge Builder: How One Cowboy's Kindness Changed a Territory." It told the story of finding Naish, of the 150 warriors who came to his aid, of the community built on principles of mutual respect and fair dealing. The article brought visitors, journalists, reformers, government officials, and ordinary people who wanted to see this place where whites and Indians lived in peace. Jack found himself giving tours of his valley, explaining over and over that there was no magic formula, just basic human decency applied consistently. "People make it sound complicated," he told one group of visiting politicians. "It's not. You treat people the way you want to be treated. You keep your word. You admit when you're wrong. You look for solutions that benefit everyone, not just yourself. These aren't Apache principles or white man's principles. They're just human principles. We've just forgotten them in our rush to take what we can." Some visitors came hoping to replicate Jack's success in their own regions. A few succeeded, creating their own small communities built on cooperation between cultures. Many failed, unable to overcome the prejudices and conflicts already entrenched in their areas. But each success, no matter how small, proved that the model could work. Mach, now a young man of 17, had grown into a natural leader. He spoke both English and Apache fluently, understood both cultures deeply, and possessed a wisdom beyond his years. He often accompanied Jack on mediation missions, learning the skills he would need when he eventually became chief. "You know what I remember most about that day you found me?" Mach asked during one of these trips. "Not the pain or the fear. Those memories have faded. What I remember is opening my eyes and seeing your face. Seeing someone who looked completely different from anyone I knew, and feeling ... safe. Even though I didn't understand your words or know your intentions, something about the way you looked at me said, 'I will not harm you.' That feeling changed everything for me." Jack was moved by this. "I just saw a child who needed help." "Exactly," Naish said. "You saw a child. Not an Apache child, not an enemy child, not a burden or a threat. Just a child. Most people can't do that. They see the difference first, and it blocks them from seeing the humanity. But you saw the humanity first. That's your gift, and it's why you've been able to do what others couldn't. As the years continued, Jack's Valley became a model referenced in government reports and reform proposals. The Sullivan Method, as some called it, was studied by those seeking to reduce conflicts between settlers and native peoples. It didn't work everywhere. Some situations were too far gone, too poisoned by past violence and broken promises. But where it did work, it saved lives and created genuine, lasting peace. Jack never got rich in the traditional sense. His ranch was successful but modest, his government salary adequate but not lavish. Yet he felt wealthy in ways that mattered more. He had friends who would die for him and for whom he would do the same. He had a community that valued him. He had work that gave his life meaning and purpose. On his 40th birthday, the community threw a celebration that brought together settlers and Apache, old friends and new ones. As Jack looked around at the diverse faces at children playing together regardless of their heritage, at former enemies sharing food and laughter, he thought back to that dusty day when he'd been a poor friendless cowboy with nothing but his conscience to guide him. Chief Cochillo, now quite elderly but still sharp of mind, raised a cup and toast to Jack Sullivan, who showed us that the greatest wealth is not in gold or land, but in the bridges we build and the lives we touch. May his example guide us all. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Jack sat with Cochillo watching the stars, the same stars that had looked down on him that night he first camped with the dying child. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past him?" the chief asked. "Sometimes," Jack admitted. "But then I realized it doesn't matter. I didn't ride past, I stopped. And that made all the difference. For all of us," Cochillo added. "You gave me back my grandson. But more than that, you gave us hope. Hope that our peoples could find a way to live together. Hope that the future didn't have to be written in blood. Hope that one person's choice really could change the world." As Jack Sullivan sat in the valley that had become his home, surrounded by the community he'd helped build, he understood something profound. He'd started out trying to save one child's life. But in doing so, he'd saved something much larger, a future that included rather than excluded, that built bridges instead of walls, that proved the power of compassion over conquest. The 150 warriors who had come to his aid that day hadn't just been repaying a debt. They'd been answering a call to something better, something nobler. They'd been saying that they too believed in a different way, a better way. And together, a poor cowboy and warriors from tribes across the territory, they proved that the impossible was possible after all. Years later, when Jack was an old man and Nash was chief, they would often tell this story to young people from both cultures. They would speak of how a single moment of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives and changing history. They would emphasize that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic battles, but about choosing compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. And somewhere in the territory, there would always be someone who heard that story and thought, maybe I could do that too. Maybe my choices matter. Maybe I could be a bridge builder. That was Jack Sullivan's true legacy, not the land he owned or the position he held, but the idea he embodied and spread, that we are all capable of changing the world, one act of kindness at a time. All we have to do is stop when others would ride on, give when others would keep, and see the humanity in faces that look different from our own. In the end, the poor cowboy who had nothing became the richest man in the territory, measured in the only currency that truly matters, the lives he touched, the bridges he built, and the better world he left behind.